It's time to talk about all of the mediocre books that I read in August. So this is, of course, my August wrap-up. In the month of August, things did not go too well. I was feeling just a little bit slumpy. I still got through a decent amount of books. I read 11 in total and I DNF'd 1. But out of the 11 books that I read, I only actually enjoyed 4 of them. So the more that I was reading that I wasn't enjoying, the less that I wanted to read. I was also busy at a few points throughout the month, so like reading was slow, but the fact that I didn't love a lot of the books that I read definitely did not help. That being said though, I did find my new favorite book of the year, or second favorite book of the year, still haven't decided, in August, and I'm really happy about that at least. So for my statistics, in the month of August I read 11 books, which added up to a total of 3,430 pages, which broke down to an average of 111 pages per day. For the star ratings, we had 3 2 stars, 4 3 stars, and only 2 4 stars and 2 5 stars, which broke down to an average of 3.27 per book. I'm normally somewhere between like 3.6 and 3.9, and as well as that, 2 of those 3 stars only just scraped 3 stars. They were very nearly 2 stars, so just quality wise it was a whole struggle. For the demographics, I read 2 young adult books, 2 new adult books, and 7 adult books. For the formats, we had 6 standardly formatted novels, 2 audiobooks, 1 arc, 1 comic, and 1 novella. The genres were an odd one actually, because I read 5 romances and only 2 fantasy, whereas fantasy is normally my dominant genre. I also read 2 fantasy romances, 1 science fiction and 1 thriller. And for the places where I sourced these books from, 6 of them were books that I hauled in 2021. 2 of them I read on Scribd. Only 1 of them was from my own TBR that existed prior to the start of 2021. 1 of them was from Kindle Unlimited and 1 of them was sent to me by the publisher. So I guess we will start off with my 1 DNF, which is absolutely no shade, as it was Little Thieves by Margaret Owen. This one I had as an e-arc on NetGalley, and it is a young adult retelling of The Goose Girl. I think it's released in October, but this one follows a young woman who I can no longer remember her name, and when she was a kid she was abandoned in the woods, and the gods of death and fortune became her godparents. When the girl came to a certain age, the gods tried to make her choose between them and choose which one she would serve, and she decided that she didn't want to make this decision, so she ran away, and for a number of years she served a princess, and the princess was set to marry the prince of a distant realm. However, on the way to this distant realm, the maid swapped places with the princess, and the princess ended up becoming a servant for a year while the maid assumed her place as the princess. So that bit is kind of like the premise of The Goose Girl, and the main character in here has taken the place of the princess. That is where we start off the novel, and she is trying to make as much money as she can to earn her own freedom. She wants to travel to the lands outside of the reach of her godparents so that she can be free. She's essentially pulling off a string of elaborate burglaries and heists to be able to do this while wearing the face of the princess. Now one day she steals something that she shouldn't, and one of the minor gods stops her and tells her that if she hasn't returned everything that she's stolen, including the life of the princess, by either the new moon or the full moon, then her greed will consume her and she will essentially turn into a pile of diamonds and rubies. So I did actually enjoy what I read of this. It has a very kind of standard fantasy setting that is rooted in old Germanic folklore and all of the like palaces and royalty, very reminiscent to me of Safi from Truthwitch. And I have read from Margaret Owen before. I've read The Merciful Crow duology, which I very much enjoyed. The only reason that I DNF'd this one is because the formatting on the Kindle version of the ebook was terrible. It was very disjointed. It was doing the thing where like a new paragraph break would start halfway through a sentence, and it was just a real struggle. The only other ways that I could have read it was on my phone or my laptop, but I can't read on either of those for extended periods periods of time. So I have decided to DNF this one, but I will definitely pick it up at a later date because I enjoyed what I read and I do really like Margaret Owen. For the books that I read that I actually completed in August, I did start off strong with Heartstopper Volume 4 by Alex Oseman. This is the 4th installment of the bind up of the Heartstopper webcomic, which is a young adult contemporary male romance. It is super simple, it's really quick to read because the frames in here are massive, and it is just a romance between these two boys, Nick and Charlie. At the start of this series, Nick is openly gay and Charlie does not even realize that he may have feelings for other boys until he meets and befriends Nick. So these two characters are side characters in one of Alice Oseman's standard novels, which I think it's Solitaire. So in that book, I believe Nick and Charlie are already together, and this is their story, like the story of their romance. It does deal with some hard-hitting topics though, so content warnings in here for eating disorders, OCD, and I think anxiety and depression as well. It is rough to read in times, but aside from that, it is a very sweet, cute, wholesome contemporary. I gave this one 5 stars. This is not my usual kind of thing, like a cute, fluffy contemporary, but I do really enjoy it in comic or manga format. And I just find this series to be really wholesome and uplifting. There was also one particularly adorable moment in this installment, which I really loved. So I gave it 5 stars, and it's just, if you just want something light and uplifting, like I said, it does have heavier topics, but generally the theme and tone of this is just really wholesome, then I would recommend that you pick up Heartstopper. And if you don't want to buy the bind-ups, it is all available to read for free on Tapas. And this one was a gift from Megan, so thank you very much, Megan, for that. I then read my least favourite book of the month, or one of, I'm not sure that this is actually my least favourite. It would be my most disappointing of my least favourites, because I did expect a little bit more from this one, and that one is Witch Shadow by Susan Dennard. So I was reading this because I was a co-host of the Witchlands Along, hosted by Jade at JDA Reads, and this is the 4th book in the Witchlands series. So at the very start of Witchlands, we are following a truth witch called Safi, and she has the ability to tell when people are telling the truth or when they are lying. This is a very covetable ability, so Safi has been hiding the truth of her abilities for a very long time, up until she runs into a blood witch called Adrian, who has the ability to scent people's blood and the magic in their blood and then track them across vast distances. And this sends Safi and her best friend Iseult on the run and careening headlong into a political plotline that centers around a 20-year treaty that is about to come to a close. Now, by book 4, we are not really following that plotline too much, although it is still there, but there is also an added plotline about some historical figures in the world and I guess the origins of the magic in there. And each book kind of focuses on a specific character. They're all multi-perspective, but each character kind of has their own book, and this one is Iseult's book. Now, I have struggled throughout this series. I think I gave the first 2 books 4 stars because I enjoyed some of the characters in there and I enjoyed some of the world. I gave the novella and the 3rd book 3 stars, and I gave this one 2 stars, so it's just continually going downhill, but I just really don't like the narrative style of this series. One thing that I find particularly jarring about this is that the writing style does not match the plot and the level of complexity in the plot. So we have a very fast pacing, a very YA writing style paired with the political complexity of an adult fantasy, and trying to absorb all of this information that's relevant to the politics while also trying to keep on top of the pace in this series is honestly just exhausting. My issue with this one in particular, which is why I got it 2 stars, is just that the plot is not developing. There are pretty much 2 plot lines, 2 driving motivations for the characters throughout this entire series, and they are either I am running away from something or I am chasing / trying to find someone. And it's just exhausting because there is an expansive plot going on behind the scenes in this series, but it is being carried entirely by these side characters. I believe that Susan Dennard's plan for this series is relevant to one of the kind of catchphrases or motifs that run throughout the series, which is to distract while the purse is cut. So essentially, I believe that these books are meant to distract the reader while Susan Dennard cuts the purse, but why am I reading so many books that aren't following the actual plot? And I feel like this distract and cut the purse thing is kind of cool in concept, but it really does not make for an enjoyable reading experience. Now I believe that there is one more core book left in this series, so I am probably going to read it if there is just one more, and I'm really hoping for an elaborate reveal where everything comes together to make all of this worthwhile, because at this moment it just really is not worth it. There are important, exciting, interesting things going on within the magic and politics of this world, and the main characters are just running around aimlessly. Things are happening to them, but they are not ever going out with something in mind. They are never interacting directly with the plot, and it's just really frustrating to read. The third book that I read was the Bromance book club by Lissa K. Adams. I picked this up because I did a little self-care weekend vlog, and romance is my go-to like self-care genre because it's like real easy to read, it's real uplifting, and it's enjoyable. But this is the first book in the Bromance book club series, and in this one we are following a guy called Gavin, who is a star baseball player, and he has just found out that his wife is faking her orgasms. He reacts badly and she ends up filing for divorce. So this book is about him trying to reignite his marriage, trying to get his wife to forgive him and fix all of the problems that they have. And to do this, he ends up going to the Bromance book club, which is a book club comprised of some influential members in the town where these characters live, who read romance novels to help them with dating and love, their relationships, and to better understand their partners. So I gave this one 4 stars. I did really enjoy it. In terms of the spectrum of romances that I've read, it was nothing incredibly mind-blowing or overwhelmingly good, but it was a solid feel-good contemporary romance. I really enjoyed the fact that this was a second chance romance. As you guys may know, I'm reasonably new to the romance genre without it being fantasy romance, so I don't think I've ever actually read a second chance romance before, and I really enjoyed that perspective of being with characters who have already had a romantic relationship and are trying to kind of patch it back together. I also enjoyed the fact that these two characters were married. They also had 2 kids, so we had the added family dynamic in there as well. And I also enjoyed some of the personalities that made up the Bromance book club, and I do believe that each of the installments in this series follow a different member of that book club. Now I will say that in terms of the comedy in here, some of it was a little bit cheesy. There were some feminist messages in here that I felt were just a little bit on the nose from the perspectives of the male characters, but overall it was a solid standalone romance. I enjoyed it, and I will be continuing on with this series. I then read an adult gothic thriller, which was Tallbones by Anna Bailey. This was the July book for the Lamentable Library Book Club, which is hosted by Hannah from Ladette M and Kelly from Velvet Library, and they very kindly invited me to join the book club for the month, and this was the book that we were reading. This one was also a gift for my birthday from Hannah, so thank you very much, Hannah, for this. This is a very slow moving thriller. It is very atmospheric. I would say that the atmosphere is one of the best parts of this, and it very much does lean into the gothic vibes with how slow, atmospheric, and also unsettling it can be in parts. However, personal preference wise, I don't read a whole ton of thrillers. When I do, I'm looking for really clever plot twists and a really compelling narrative and something that keeps me hooked from start to finish, and this was definitely not that. So I gave this 3 stars overall. But this takes place in a very small town, and we have a lot of small town drama in here, and it is multi-perspective, but the premise is that we are following this girl who is at a party one night at the Tallbones with her best friend, and she leaves her best friend behind. Her friend says like, oh, don't worry, like I'll be okay, you just go on home, and her best friend never returns. She goes missing from that moment. From that moment on, we are following a lot of characters that knew this girl and are possibly surrounding this mystery, and the way that the narrative in here is laid out is that everybody has a secret. Some of them may be related to what happened to the girl, some of them aren't, but everybody in this book has a deep dark secret, and as we are going through the book, those secrets are being uncovered. So something that I did really like about this one is that you are unsure what happened up until you get to the point where it's actually revealed, because everybody in this book is suspicious and anybody could have had anything something to do with this girl's disappearance. So that was something that I did enjoy. But on the other hand, what I didn't like is that in every kind of chapter it would come up to a moment where a character like finds a clue and it wouldn't even tell you what the clue is. Like, it was clear that the character had found something important, it was clear that something important had been realized in that moment, but it would cut to the next chapter, and as readers we would never actually find out what that is until it was like sprinkled in a later chapter, which I didn't really enjoy, because I felt like every time we built up to this moment it was really dissatisfying for us not to get the reveal, and then with it being revealed like just sprinkled in and kind of glossed over in a later chapter, I feel like it cheapened it and made it feel less important, if that makes sense. So 3 stars for this one. It was okay. There were things that I enjoyed and didn't enjoy about it. If you like really slow moving, small town atmospheric thrillers, then you may enjoy this one, but for me, I prefer things to be more twisty and fast-paced, and this did not deliver on that. I then read pretty much the one saving grace of August, which was Golden Sun by Pierce Brown, and I love this book. I was obsessed with this book. I'm still thinking about it even like 2 or 3 weeks after I finished it. So this is the sequel to Red Rising, which is an adult sci-fi set on Mars with a dystopian uprising plot and a lot of martial fantasy elements in there as well. So our main character for this series is Darrow, and Darrow is a red in a caste system where reds are on the bottom and golds are way up at the top. Now the reds are kept under the surface of Mars, where they mine for a substance called helium-3, which they believe is a very valuable resource that is needed to terraform the planets so that humanity can escape the dying planet Earth. However, while Darrow wholeheartedly believes in this cause, there are people in his community, including his wife, who don't quite believe that that is the case. So Darrow's wife orchestrates her own capture and execution to spur Darrow into action for his people, because she sees the potential in him to be a great leader. So after this, Darrow goes to the surface of Mars and he realizes that his entire life has been a lie, and there are people living on the surface of the planets, and they have been for hundreds of years. So Darrow then joins a rebellion, and with their help he infiltrates the Golds with the plan of then tearing them apart from the inside. So I really enjoyed Red Rising, but this is a very dense, well thought out world. There is a whole ton of world building, including very specific things like different dialects, and there is the caste system to get to grips with, and different dialects within those castes, and also like minor breakdowns of each caste as well within the larger sections. So the first book was a lot to get to grips with, and I only started enjoying it around halfway through. I knew going into this that the plot took a different turn. I knew that it was going to be faster paced, and I was actually a little bit worried because I don't love fast-paced books, like we all know this. However, I was wholly obsessed with this from start to finish. This is so dynamic, so high stakes. Pierce Brown does not pull punches in here. You are going to be upset when you are reading this series, because it doesn't matter if it's your favorite character on the page, Pierce Brown is likely to do something terrible to them. One of my favorite things about this series as well is that it is incredibly angsty. Now, some of that annoys me. Darrow spends a lot of time talking about his wife Io, who we only met for a couple of chapters of Red Rising, and still going into Golden Sun he talks about her quite frequently, and that is a little bit eye-rolly. But there is also other things going on, like there are blood feuds between some of the characters, there are shocking betrayals which you feel like may come, but because you like some of the characters you really don't want it to happen, so it's still shocking when it does happen. And it is also well thought out in those instances as well, like you can see the breadcrumbs and understand why these characters have done what they've done, even though you really hate it. I also find the level of angst and drama in here to be very Shakespearean with the blood feuds and just how dramatic it is. The Gold society in here is also heavily influenced by the Roman Empire, so I feel like that also adds a level of drama and also really builds up the atmosphere. And something that did actually surprise me about this, given how fast-paced it is that I fell in love with a whole ton of the characters. Severo is still 100% my favorite, but I now also really love Ragnar, and Darrow has grown on me as well. Didn't love him in Red Rising, but as we went throughout this he really grew on me, and I'm so excited but also so scared to pick up Morningstar because I know it's gonna hurt. It's the end of the first trilogy. I do know there's a second trilogy with 2 books already published and a third to come. I don't think I'm gonna start that second trilogy anytime soon until we get news about the third book, just because I don't think I could deal with the end of the second book if it's anything like this trilogy, where this ended on a massive cliffhanger. The last chapter of this book was wild, but I am going to be reading Morningstar very soon. It's on my September TBR and I'm ready to be emotionally destroyed. I then read a very frustrating arc, which was The Last Graduate by Naomi Novik. This was sent to me by Del Rey, so thank you very much to Del Rey for sending this my way. So this one is the sequel to Deadly Education, which is published as adult in the UK, and I think that is just because it's published by Del Rey, so it's automatically adult, but it does very much read like young adult. And in here we are following a main character called Elle, who I love, who is a very angry, bitter teenager in the first book, Deadly Education. She has come from a background where she was rejected by most of her family at a very young age. She's grown up pretty much exclusively with her mother, and she has an affinity to dark magic, so people have always been wary and cautious and rude to her because of that. This series is called The Scholomance, and The Scholomance is a school that was created specifically to train magically gifted children. When they enter this school, they don't leave for, I think it's 4 years, up until they graduate, and the reason for that is that the world is full of these monsters called Maleficara who like to prey on magically gifted children because they are pretty much defenseless. They do not have the strength or the skill to defend themselves. So they go to the Scholomance, which is a heavily warded school built into the void, and they spend 4 years there. Now this school is warded against Maleficara, but there are some gaps in the wards, especially in the graduation hall, and to be able to graduate from this school you have to fight your way through a room full of monsters. So the first book centers on Elle building an alliance or joining an enclave to be able to do that, and the second book is about graduation. So like I said, I love Elle. We also have another prominent character in here called Orion, who is the complete opposite to Elle. He's pretty much a himbo. He is like a big sweet puppy that follows her around, and he is the hero of the school. He's been saving people's lives from these monsters. He's great at killing them. He doesn't really know why, he just knows he's real good at it. One of the main points of the first book is that Elle is increasingly angry at him because he keeps saving her life and she doesn't think she needs it, and she doesn't want to be indebted to him. So those two characters I absolutely adore, especially in the way that they interact with each other because they're polar opposites. I also really love the setting and the perfect fall vibes in the atmosphere of the school, with this like impending doom because a monster could jump out of the vents and attack them at any time. And obviously we love a magic school concept, especially when this whole series is based exclusively on this magic school. It's not like the magic school just like plays a part of one of the books. The entire series is about it. However, something I just cannot get past in this series, which makes me so frustrated, is that I despise the writing style. Now, despise is a strong word, and normally I'm not too strong in my opinions either way, just because of how much potential this series has, how much I love the characters and the plot and the atmosphere. It is so frustrating to have to read this story in this writing style because there is so much endless cutaway exposition in this series that it infuriates me. So the writing style in general is very conversational, which isn't my personal preference, but you know, I can get behind it. I don't hate it. I will read a book with a conversational writing style, but because of this conversational writing style, all of the world building is done in little cutaway tangents where something will be happening in the story and it will remind Elle of something else, and she will go into pages of description about this one event that happened one time that's kind of relevant to the point that she's making, or explains the point, but isn't actually super relevant to the overall story. So in here we had a lot of the politics of very minor enclaves, because Elle briefly mentions a character who's from a very minor insignificant enclave, but goes into a page of explanation about the politics between this enclave and another one that actually just does not mean anything to the story. When I was reading this, I did say that I had a suspicion that the audiobook for this series would be a better way to enjoy enjoy it because of the conversational writing style. A lot of you guys in the comments of that vlog did agree with me. My problem was with The Last Graduate is that I had an arc of it, so I did not have a audiobook that I could listen to, but I did listen to a sample of the Deadly Education one, and I do feel like that would be a better way to read this series, just because having it read aloud to you would match the conversational tone. It would be kind of like you are speaking to Elle and she is telling you this entire story. So I did have an e-arc of Deadly Education. I had a physical arc of Last Graduate. I don't think I'm gonna get an arc of the last book in this series, which will hopefully be released next year. I think I'm gonna wait and listen to the audiobook because there is so much about this series that I love. I just need to be able to ingest it in a way that does not infuriate me, because the last 90 pages of this book as well was so good, because when it finally gets down to the action of the story, it drops all of the exposition and it is a so much more enjoyable story. I nearly cried at the end of this book, and I'm not a book crier. I don't get emotional very often, so there is potential in there for the story to be amazing. I just really hate the way the world building is done in here. I actually cannot stand it and it makes me so mad. I then read a very hyped indie fantasy romance that I was sadly not impressed by. I'm really upset, and that was A Deal with the Elf King by Elise Cover. So this is the first in a series of standalone fantasy romances in the Married to Magic series, and each one is going to follow like a different magical creature. So this one is the Elf King, the next one is the Fey Rogue, and then the third one's title has just been announced, which is the Vampire Lord. And you know, I love my Fey romance, and elves are pretty similar. So a standalone fairy romance with a beautiful cover. I really just thought I was going to adore this, and I just really didn't. So the plot of this is that we're following a young woman called Luella, who is a human healer, and she has a shop, she has patients, and she really enjoys helping people. The town that Luella lives in is built right next to the Fade, which is the area in between the human world and the elven realm, and every 100 years the Elf King comes to the human town and he takes a human queen. However, they haven't had a human queen in a few years, and the purpose of the queen is to restore balance to both of the worlds. So things are not going too well. Like, nature isn't doing too well, the seasons aren't stable, people are dying and not living as long as they should. So right in the very first chapter of this book, we find out that Luella is in love with her best friend, and we also find out that her best friend has actually been concealing her magic, so the Elf King does not find out that she is the human queen. However, they do very shortly discover that she is indeed the human queen, and she is taken off to the elven realm, where she finds herself vastly unprepared for the role that she must take up, because she has not had the years of training that is typical for a human queen. So this is kind of a hate to love romance. It's also a Hades and Persephone romance. We have the very like cold, serious elven king, and Luella, who just desperately wants to go home because the people of her town need her. So there is no like super dramatic reason or anything for why I didn't like this. It just really didn't hit with me on any level. The writing in here is okay. It's nothing special, but it does the job, and the characters are fine, but I didn't gel with them. The Elf King, he was like attractive but didn't really do much for me. Luella, I didn't find her to be a very compelling character to follow throughout this, and I just had no emotional connection to them at all. I didn't feel any chemistry between them. Sexual tension is very important to me when reading a romance, and I just got absolutely none of it in this. From the beginning of this as well, I could very clearly see like where this was going and how it was going to turn out to be a romance. Like, you know, going into this, it is advertised as a standalone romance with a happily ever after, so I feel like that really diminished the intrigue for me. I knew everything was going to turn out all right. The conflict in here was nothing incredibly dramatic, and I will say that the fantasy elements were fine. Like, the solution to the plot, which the main plot in here is how to break the cycle so that the elves don't have to keep taking human queens, the resolution to that was fine. It was well done, it was well constructed, but everything about this was just okay, and I just did not care about it either way. The last 100 pages of this as well were a real struggle for me. I was really pushing to persevere through so that I didn't DNF this, and yeah, it just didn't hit on any level. I had no interest in this at all. I think I am going to try at least the next book in the series, which is, I think it is The Dance with the Fey Rogue, and see if I enjoyed that one more. Fey are my favorite creatures to follow, especially in terms of fantasy romance. But I suspect that this book, hopefully not the entire series because I am going to try out that second book, but this book is a very good introduction to fantasy romance if you've never read it before. But I think for the more experienced fantasy romance reader, you're not going to get a whole ton out of this, sadly. But this one was a gift from the lovely Jenna, so thank you very much to Jenna for gifting this one to me. I then read 3 books that I didn't enjoy very much, and I'm going to talk about them all together, and that was the first 2 books and the first novella in the Planet Barbarians series by Ruby Dixon. So I read these for Polathon. I read Planet Barbarians, Barbarian Alien, and Planet Honeymoon's Georgian Vectal, if I remember correctly is his name. But I listened to the core installments in this series on audiobook, and I read the novella, which was only like 50 pages, on Kindle Unlimited. And I read these because I was doing the Polathon mini meltdown, which was a 36-hour readathon hosted by Jade at January Reads. So I have heard some pretty good things about Planet Barbarians. Mainly I've heard that the smut in here is really good while the plot is just average, and I wanted to give them a try. I've never read sci-fi romance because when I think of sci-fi romance, I think of tentacles, and that just really puts me off. However, I was assured that there are no tentacles in this series. It is just big blue alien men, and from how far I've read into the series, if you're scared of tentacles like me, you're absolutely fine reading this. There are none. So I didn't know if I would like it, but I thought at least the smut will be good. If I don't like it, at least they'll be reasonably entertaining. But I was just bored. It was like Den of Vipers all over again. So in this series, we are following a group of human women that are abducted by aliens, and content warnings in the first book for sexual assault. But they're all 22-year-old human women. They are abducted by aliens and they are being transported somewhere when they are dropped off on this ice planet, and they know that they only have a limited amount of time before the aliens that abducted them are going to come back and collect them and take them to wherever they're going. So in the very first book, our main character is Georgie, and she heads out into this ice planet looking for a sign of life or a way to get back to Earth. And when she's there, she stumbles across Vectal, who is the leader of the tribe on this ice planet. From what I can tell from reading the first 2 books is that every installment in this series follows one of the human women and one of the members of this alien tribe, and then the novellas are like a little bonus romantic add-on to whichever book you've just read. So Planet Honeymoon's Georgie and Vectal is a continuation of Planet Barbarians, and then there's also one for Liz and Rahosh, which is a continuation of Barbarian Alien, but I didn't read that one because I just didn't care. So I listened to the audiobooks for the first 2, and I will say that the audiobook narration is decent. I will also say that possibly listening to smut in audio impacted my enjoyment of the smutty sections, because when I did read the novella, I did enjoy the smut a little bit more. However, just generally in terms of the smut, like I've just mentioned with the deal with the Elf King, I really need sexual tension between the characters to even enjoy the smut or the romantic elements, and once again I felt absolutely no sexual tension within these romances. Also, content warnings in this series for dubious consent. These alien men like to drag unconscious women into caves and strip them naked. So if that's something that would hinder your enjoyment, then I would recommend that you skip this series. But something that really bugged me about this series is the focus on pregnancy. So the whole purpose of all of these books, or the ones that I've read, I can't make broad sweeping terms about the rest of the series, but the 2 that I read were pretty much the same story. It is a human woman who's kind of weirded out and reluctant to have a relationship with an alien who is eventually won over by him because of the strength of their mating bond, and then gets pregnant. I don't love pregnancy and romances, probably because I personally am very unsure about whether I will ever have children. I don't know if that's on the cards to me. I'm not really a very maternal, nurturing human, and so pregnancy I don't love in romances. But something that really bugged me about this series is in the first book, pregnancy without consent, and in the second book, which kind of matches up with the first book, is that these women don't want to get pregnant until they have unprotected sex, they get pregnant, and now they're like, oh, I'm gonna have an alien baby. So if you want a book just for a bit of smut, then I would maybe recommend that you check these out. I would say though, if you do enjoy them, to not read them back to back, because the plot lines are very much the same, and the more I read, the more bored that I got. But the audiobook narration for these, I would say, is fantastic. So if you like your audios, then then you may enjoy listening to them as opposed to reading them. So the first book, Planet Barbarians, I gave 3 stars to. It was okay, but I felt no type of way about it. And then the novella, Ice Planet Honeymoons, Georgian Vector, I gave 2 stars. And the second book, Barbarian Alien, I also gave 2 stars too. And then the final book that I read this month was another saving grace, which was Guild by Raven Kennedy. I really enjoyed this one. It is another indie fantasy romance, and this one is a King Midas retelling. So the synopsis of this book gives absolutely nothing away. It just pretty much says that everything is made of gold, including the main character, and that it is a King Midas retelling. So I thought that this was going to be a little bit of a hit with me from the very first chapter, because it is a little bit of a darker fantasy romance. Our main character has been gold touched by King Midas. Content warnings in here for child trafficking and also sexual assault. So before Midas was a king, our main character was captured by traffickers, and Midas saved her from this. So since he has become a king, he has kept her in this cage, which he's actually quite content to be because of all of the awful things that happened to her when she was out in the world and she was free. I will say that there are some Stockholm Syndrome vibes in here as well, because from what I've read of Midas, he's not a great guy, but our character is in love with him regardless because he saved her from the terrible life that she had before she met him. So that's kind of the setup for this book. And one thing that I really loved about this is that I would say it is fantasy romance or like romantic fantasy, but there is not a romantic arc throughout this first book. There are just hints of romance. And something that kept me reading this, that kept me intrigued, is that I went into this assuming straight off that as it was a Midas retelling and the main character wasn't Midas, that the romance was going to be between Midas and the main character. However, straight off the bat, like, Midas is a little bit suspicious. He has a harem. This book opens with an orgy. He also has a wife. He's horrible to the main character. Very early on in this book, he tries to use her essentially as a bargaining chip to get another king to do what he wants, and all of that bit is really gross. So I was confused throughout the entirety of this book how Midas was going to be the love interest in here, and at the point of finishing this, I'm still not sure if he is, especially as there is an introduction of another character that I'm really intrigued about. Because I didn't know very much going into this, because the synopsis is super vague, and even with what I told you, like, you guys would still be shocked by the twist in here. The plot twist came out of nowhere but still made sense, and I'm just really excited to carry on and read the rest of this series. I have heard in terms of this series that this one is the weakest, that it reads like a really long prequel, and I do understand where people are coming from with that. Like, the actual plot in terms of what's happening in this book, nothing overly special, but the direction and the elements that were introduced definitely kept me reading. I would say in terms of pacing, I'm used to reading a lot of adult epic high fantasy, so I had no issue with the pacing in this. But in terms of fantasy romance, like if we compare it to things like Rhapsodic by Laura Thalassa, it does have a much slower pace, and it doesn't have that romantic self-contained arc within the first book that I'm used to. So I do understand why people would feel that way, but I have heard that the 2 books that follow this are absolutely amazing, and I am so excited to get into them. I was so impressed by this and just so intrigued from the very first page, and I'm still continually intrigued going forward to find out the romantic elements of this plot, because I'm just so confused. And of course, I have already mentioned the content warnings of child trafficking and sexual assault in this one, but there is a very graphic depiction of rape on the page in here, so please do be careful if you are picking this one up. And this one was a gift for my birthday from the lovely Stacey, so thank you so much to Stacey. I adored this. 4 stars because, like, the plot isn't anything overly special. 5-star predictions for the next 2 books in this series, and a couple of people have actually requested that I make spoiler vlogs for the next 2 books in the series, so please let me know down in the comments if that is something that you guys may be interested in. So those were all of the books that I read in August. It was a mediocre, underwhelming bunch with a couple of saving graces, but I am hoping for more from September. September is the Bookoplathon, which is my readathon, which means I got to pull through and read a whole ton of books, and I'm a little bit nervous, but I do think I have a pretty solid TBR with a lot of books that I'm really gonna love, so fingers crossed that will spur me onward. And and get me, I was gonna say get me out of the slump that I'm in. I'm feeling slumpy. I'm not in a slump. I just need a little bit more excitement when it comes to reading, and hopefully some good books will do that for me. But that is the end of this wrap up, guys. Please let me know down in the comments if you've read any of these books and what you thought of them. But aside from that, please don't forget to like this video if you liked it and subscribe if you wanna. If you head to my description box, you'll find a link to my Goodreads, Instagram, Twitter if you'd like to follow me on any of those, as well as a link to my Bookish Candle website, the Instagram and Etsy for that, and a 10% off discount code. But that's it from me today, guys. Bye!
Oh, you bite your friend like chocolate. You say you're will go where nobody knows, with guns hidden under our petticoats. We're never gonna quit it, no, we're never gonna quit it, no.